Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and with video here on YouTube. This week, we are dropping all the serious. You know, most of the time, this is a pretty serious podcast. I take up some pretty weighty topics. I have covered, sexual assault and destructive cults and child abuse and some really, horrible, horrible stuff. And this week, we're not going to cover anything horrible. This week, we are going into the fun zone. I love Star Wars, and I love Star Trek a little bit more. But this episode is going to be about Star Wars. And this has actually been, there's been a couple of things I've wanted to take on with Star Wars over the years. I thought actually a while back about doing a whole episode on the morality or the ethics of Star Wars as shown in the movies, and what is the philosophy of the dark side and the light side and all that. And I thought, that's just so super, super, super deeply geeky that it probably blows the demographics of my channel, and nobody would want to watch anything that obscure and stupid. So I didn't do anything about that. But a friend of mine and I got to talking about Star Wars because I think this came up on Twitter or something. Something came up on Star Wars. And I reached out. He's also a podcaster. His name is Chris Crimey. And now, did I get Crimey? Crimey, yes. Okay, good. I did get it the first time. Whoa. He's actually been on my podcast before. He and I have been, he's been a sort of a Scientology watcher and commentator. And so this time we're going to talk Star Wars because he reached out to me and he said, we need to do a podcast about our disagreements on the subject. And I went, all right, we can do that. I'm always down to talk about Star Wars. So, Chris, welcome to my show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm glad that you told me before the show started that you have rewatched the prequels, which I think is helpful because I have a habit of talking to people, put my foot in my mouth about things that don't completely know science fiction wise, like Star Trek, Star Wars, Scientology. But I'm ready to go. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's go for it. So, kind of as research, I sat down and watched the prequels again because I haven't seen them in many, many years. And I wanted to kind of, be up on all the details in case I had forgotten something significant because the prequels for me were always the most confusing of the movies. And so, kind of going back and watching them boom, boom, boom and watching the political thread and as well as what I was more interested in when I was watching them, which was the Anakin thread. And Ben Kenobi and how did he screw it all up, right? As the mentor, as the teacher, and sort of what did Lucas want to throw in my face? And so I had always in the past watched it from that perspective, but this time I was watching it more from the longer term. How did this whole republic become a galactic empire, and what were the sequence of events for Palpatine to assume power and all of that? And how did he fool the Jedi? And what was the whole separatist movement? And how did that work and play against the Republic so that he could assume power? Kind of watching that whole thing play out in more detail. And then tackling New Hope again, the original Star Wars movie.
Right.
With all that backstory in place. And then you go into that movie and, but for me, New Hope will always hold the highest ranking in all the Star Wars.
Well, that's what started for all of us, and even some of the older folks like us who've been there since the beginning. It's really Empire for a lot of people. I do feel like, I'll just put this in there, but I know you probably have a format you want to go by, but Rogue One for me, right there with Empire for me, really.
Wow, interesting. And not an unusual opinion. I've seen that certainly expressed before. I think most people in ranking the films put Empire at the top, or they put New Hope on top and Empire right below it. I think Empire is the best made and some of the best storytelling in a single episode. And I think that was partly because Lucas didn't write it, if I remember right. I think that was when he brought. I believe. I think. Really should have checked the credits and stuff before we got on. But I think that's when Lawrence Kasdan came along, and he was involved in Raiders and various other things. And very good writer. So anyway, then so Empire is often looked at as the best cinematic, movie of the lot. But I have to put New Hope first because Empire can't exist without New Hope. So.
True.
And New Hope, it has its own package of goodness and awesomeness to it that puts it at number one for me. But it's tight, it's close, because I have said in the past that I thought Empire was better. So it's something I've weighed, and I'm able to move. I'm able to change my mind on this one. It's not lock solid. How dare you? Who do you think you are saying Empire isn't the best or whatever?
Well, I think the perspective matters too, because what made New Hope so awesome was we had never seen anything like that before.
Right.
So for you and I, it was new. It was something fresh and different. And we have that nostalgia. So even today, even if you look back and watch it today, you can see it's older, but it was the first of its kind. But I'm around a lot of people who are in the 20s. And they'll tell me that their favorite movies were the prequels, and that's because that's what they grew up with. That's what they went for the theater for. They look back at A New Hope, and it's an old movie to them.
That's definitely true. I know in dealing with this topic that we're dealing with a multi-generational thing too. Totally aware of that, and I know that I come into this as the grumpy old man. I'm 49. I'm no millennial, I was 7 years old when the first movie came out, right? When New Hope hit the screens. I remember standing in line at Grauman's Chinese Theater to go see it in the theater, and they were called blockbusters for a reason. They literally, the lines busted the block. They went all the way around.
Right.
Like for Star Wars, I think 3 times the line went around the block. These were big blocks. So these were, immensely popular films when they came out, all of them, and for every generation. So I know, that I recognize my bias, my childhood bias.
A lot of us older guys walked uphill in snow back and forth about 30 separate times to see the film. So yeah,
that's right. That's right. Well, how old were you? What was your experience?
Well, actually, my introduction to Star Wars was Empire Strikes Back. It was my first in-theater movie. I didn't know what it was. I was introduced to Star Wars and New Hope on VHS. And then that's when I watched the whole trilogy together. Came out of school about a half hour early for Jedi.
Before you even saw New Hope?
I did. I didn't know what it was. And I had to go back and watch Empire a couple of times as I got a little bit older so I can put the chronological order in there in my head, and it made sense more.
Right. So that was your first introduction to it. You caught up, and then what was your reaction when the prequels started rolling out?
Okay, so I kind of categorize how we saw the prequels the way you categorize the process of grieving. There's
grieving.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not quite the same steps, the same stages. You start out excited because you're like, oh, you're just happy to have another Star Wars, and then you think deeper about it, and you go, what did I just watch? You go, why did they do this and that? You start tearing it apart, and you go, well, this is a crappy movie. And you're like, I'm glad there is another one, but it could have been so much better, and there's a lot of missed opportunities. Part of it is, if you're looking at LucasArts or Disney, no matter who you're looking at, it was all a money grab. Lucas did in the 70s do an interview where he talked about the origin story. We started, when it released in theaters, it said episode 4. So there was 3 movies before it planned, 3 stories before it. But honestly, you could have made such a great 3.5-hour blockbuster movie, one movie, to tell the entire story how he became Darth Vader, honestly. And I think that's what causes problems with episode 1. Episode 1, you're adding all kinds of story that doesn't need to be there. You got the whole thing with the junk dealer that's the slave owner. You got with a 16-year-old making goo-goo eyes and a 7-year-old. The whole thing felt wrong.
Well, tell me how it was that, I'm watching this last night, actually, and I'm talking to my wife, and I'm like, wait a second. Okay, the kid's a slave, quote unquote. His mother is a slave, right? They're in slavery, yet Qui-Gon and company all go over to their house that she lives in all day. She doesn't she's there as soon as her son comes home, toting a Jedi Knight and company into the house. And she just stands there and goes, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, let's have dinner together. And she makes them dinner in this house that she lives in by herself with her son. And I'm like, where's the slavery here? I'm not quite tracking with where the slavery part of this comes in. Like, there's no physical abuse. There's no emotional abuse. They're just slaves. And I'm like, well, okay. But if they stopped being slaves today and went out on their own on Tatooine.
Watto's going to chase them down. Wings flapping.
What possible fate could they, this slavery thing looked like the best gig in town, in other words, right? They kept saying how awful it was, and I agree that slavery is awful. So why are you showing me something that it doesn't look awful at all as a life that this kid is having,
Maybe it's like gold base, but instead of barbed wire, it's miles and miles of desert, nowhere to go.
Well, that's kind of the point. I mean, you're a slave of the planet, sure, but
not everyone's a Jedi coming to rescue you from your slave owner, but I don't know what Watto would do, to be honest with you. I don't know if he had enforcers. I don't remember that ever being discussed. Who was going to stop him?
I never saw anything like that. He let the kid off early to go play. I mean, he sort of was very supportive of the kid, For a slave owner, I was like, all right. I mean, the only time it really reared its head is when mom couldn't go with him. That's the only point where it became, and it, so it seemed that was some sort of plot device to separate them because that was the easiest possible way to think of doing it.
So you want it along with along with the bureaucratic government stuff, you wanted there to be politics and another hour added to explain slavery on Tatooine?
Look, I'm just saying, if you're going to show me a slave existence, then, there were other Star Wars movies where there were people shown in a really bad, horrible labor camp situation, and it looked awful. That, Anakin's life did not look awful.
It didn't.
Kind of all I'm saying here, as awful as it could be given the fact that he was on Tatooine. And of course, if you lived in Tatooine, everything's awful. So,
it's true. It's true.
Not saying he was on Easy Street, but, just saying for the kind of life you could have in a place like that, they were doing okay. And then, definitely. Then he gets whisked off. Oh, and okay. Now this prequel. The prequels are what opened the door to my biggest, probably my single biggest problem, if I think about it really hard here. I think this is the one. I think this is the biggest problem I have with what the prequels did. And that was introducing midi-chlorians.
Right? I don't know. You and I, we talked about this before we started. You and I both aren't Star Wars geeks to the point that we know all the trash canon from the books that upset a lot of Star Wars geeks. So I don't know if midi-chlorian, I don't think they ever came up because people were way too angry about that. And it does feel like Luke Skywalker in episode 8 kind of completely debunks midi-chlorians, so I don't know.
I mean, they certainly didn't continue it in the new trilogy, but Lucas did double down on it in the prequels. Because he later on in the stories, they talk about how Anakin has the highest midi-chlorian count of any being he's ever encountered. And then later in the third episode, in Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine explains to an older Anakin now that there was this earlier Darth guy, Darth Plagueis or something, who could use the midi-chlorians to create life. So he doubled down on the midi-chlorians part when he said that in the third episode. Okay. So Lucas intended to keep it, but I thought it was the dumbest construct ever. I guess he did that to avoid some kind of spirituality message or something, but kind of too late, dude. The first 3 movies were all about that. So
I'm starting to think now that you say it.
flunk.
Now you say, I'm starting to think midi-chlorians might come back again, because you remember Anakin supposedly doesn't have a father. Maybe he is created
and
life.
that aspect of that being the virgin birth, I just about fell out of my chair when that happened.
But maybe it was Darth Plagueis' doing.
I thought about that.
Something along those lines.
I thought about that, but we're never going to really know what that deal. I mean, that was Lucas's storyline, and I guess somebody could pick it up and do a prequel to the prequels.
Okay.
But
love to see it, by the way.
That connection is sort of implied there, but it's also made clear in the Revenge of the Sith that it seemed like when Palpatine was talking about Darth Plagueis to Anakin, it sounded like it could be that he was the apprentice under Darth Plagueis. But then later, when Anakin actually joins him and says, "Okay, what's the secret? How do we keep life going?" Palpatine then says, "We're going to have to figure that out together. We have to learn how to do that, because I know it's possible to do it, but I don't know how to do it." Right? Which I would have been pretty pissed if I was Anakin, because he's like dropping all these promises that he's going to be able to save Padme, and then, oh yeah, no, actually what we're going to have to do is, I know nuclear power is possible, but we're going to have to figure out how to build a reactor. I mean, it's no big deal. We'll do it. We'll get there.
Well, once you got to the point that you've killed all the younglings and you're responsible for the death of your spouse who you turned to the dark side to save, and all you are is robot parts, you have no one to go to. So you got to stay with the Emperor.
Oh, no doubt. By that point, that's for sure. I was looking a bit earlier in the story before all that went down. When he first pledged loyalty, and to his credit, I actually on review I liked the sequence of events that he created, which led to Anakin's betrayal of his own principles and the black equals white moment in his head, when everything he had fought against and hated and worked against, he embraced, but he maintained the exact same headspace that he was fighting for right and truth and justice and peace and a good galaxy, and we are the good guys, and from my point of view the Jedi are evil. That I think Lucas got right.
Everybody believes they're good.
Crazy,
Yeah, the darkness is the good. That's true. I'll say this: I want to ask you, did you think that was weird that the Emperor Palpatine influenced Anakin to chop the head off of Dooku, and then just a little bit later on, you got Mace Windu hanging out the window, yelling, "We have to kill him. It's the only way."
Yes.
Wasn't he saying the same thing Palpatine was saying?
Yes, he was, and I did not appreciate that. Exactly what you just pointed out, I had not noticed until I just watched him last night.
Do you think there's a deeper meaning in all that?
Absolutely. In fact, I got to thinking about this whole. I've thought quite a bit about how this prophecy is supposed to work, how Vader is supposed to bring balance to the Force, right? And what does that mean? And I looked at the prequels and I looked at how the Jedi acted and I went, okay, too good, right? Like lawful good. Too extreme. They're so good they think they can't do bad, right? Sometimes how not as bad, but on their way to. Did you see Good Omens on Netflix or Amazon?
I have not seen that.
It was a Terry Pritchard movie book, and they put it into and Neil Gaiman, and they screenplayed it and made it into a thing. I only bring it up because the people in heaven are portrayed this way. Like they're so arrogant, they're so sure that they're right that they couldn't even consider the possibility that what they're doing could be possibly off the rails in any way. Right? They're beyond criticism.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of the direction the Jedi were moving in. They weren't shown to be that extreme, but they were definitely on their way. And then, of course, you had the Sith representing the dark side, or the ultimate of the dark side, right? The Sith, of course, being, far more interesting than the Jedi.
Sure.
Anyway, so you have this out of balanceness, because if these are, and the way I always looked at it was, if these are the good guys, they're moving away from a place of balance. Like you sort of assume that the good guys are kind of the balanced ones and the bad guys are the extremists. But I got to thinking about that. I think that might be an incorrect assumption. And maybe where Lucas was taking this, or maybe where it could be taken that would make the most sense, is that I'm wondering if this is going to be in this 9th movie. And if it is, I will actually be very, very impressed.
So I was going to ask you, because I was going to say, the whole reason I came to you and said, let's do a conversation about this. First of all, I wasn't going to do it in Messenger and on Twitter. You tweeted,
right.
This was a life event for me. Star Wars was everything, and you ruined it. And I was like, I don't know if you're overreacting on that. I mean, we have expectations. We have expectations. And those expectations might not be something that can be lived up to, given where the sequels were supposed to be, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So we can't have what we want.
Well, fair enough. I mean, obviously, all of this is just opinion.
Right.
It's my film criticism of this. And I did say at the beginning, I am biased towards the original trilogy as core, elemental, foundational. This is how the Star Wars universe works. And my problems with the prequels are story issues and are, Lucas borrowing from some things that I thought were kind of ridiculous, like the virgin birth thing and stuff, and the midi-chlorians. I'm like, completely, wholly unnecessary explanations for the story you're telling. And bringing in religious overtones that are definitely not needed. He goes away from the spirituality with the midi-chlorians, but then he dives wholeheartedly into the pool of religion with the virgin birth, right? So you're kind of like, what are you trying to do here? But those are my problems with the prequels. But my problems with the later trilogy is that it seems to be that Star Wars is now gone from an adventure yarn and a very simple morality tale to social justice activism. And I really didn't like that. I really didn't.
I don't know. I didn't get that at all from episode 8. I got that 8 was just a mess. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
It was, not only was it, okay. I mean, actually, maybe I could get away with saying this. I don't know. I hadn't considered it till now. But if the storytelling had been compelling instead of insanely stupid, then maybe the social justice activism wouldn't have bothered me as much. But it was so awkwardly round peg in a square hole jammed into my face that I just felt like I was being assaulted during the movie. And, come on, guys, I don't mean physically assaulted. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I felt like I was like, my reality, my understanding of Star Wars as it works, as a framework of how you tell a story, suddenly all these other blocks were being added to that didn't make any sense to me in a Star Wars context.
All right, well, I look at it like this. So episode 1, I've always tried to explain to people because I don't get as upset about it as anyone does. As much as I love the series, I mean, I see the problems, but I don't get upset about it. But I thought 1 was like, if you're going to do a trilogy, it was a necessary evil, all the slowness and boredom of it all and dragged out in the midi-chlorians and all that. And the slavery, but you have the Darth Maul thing, and you have that building block. You can't do it without it.
Yes.
And
to its credit, the third act of episode 1, Phantom Menace, is quite good.
Yeah.
Yeah. The lightsaber battle, the star battle, the temple battle, the field battle, all happening all at once, and you're keeping up with all of it.
It was really good.
That was well done. That was relatively well done filmmaking.
So in my thinking process, getting prepared for this conversation, I was thinking about probably the biggest piece of the movies of this current trilogy that really has the biggest problems is episode 8, the one that just happened.
Yeah.
And I go back and forth. I go, well, it's the middle movie in a trilogy. It's not supposed to make a ton of sense. but they should give us something.
Nah.
What we wanted, we weren't going to get.
Dissonance that way.
Well, that was one way I was looking at it.
I know.
Now, the other way I'm looking at it is any movie I've ever seen of any trilogy, of any series of films, in any film, usually, even if there's a swerve at the end, everything that happens in the movie happens for a reason. If you look at Avengers Endgame, it's a 3-hour and change movie where so much happens in it. And when I was watching it for 2 hours, not to get off of subject of Star Wars, but I'm just making a comparison here. There was 2 hours of it I was wondering, did that need to be there? And I thought back and said, yes, the movie isn't complete without those 2 hours. Everything that happens in a movie usually happens for a reason. And this movie felt like they just had to contractually do a movie.
You're talking about the last one, yeah, I agree. It was very, very poorly put together. It looked pieced together the same way that Abrams' Wrath of Khan version of Star Trek looked pieced together, which Abrams later literally admitted they had done. They said, okay, we have to have this scene, and this scene. And then they just came up with bullshit glue to stick those scenes together. And that's the movie that you get, right?
Did you not like that movie?
No, I did not, for exactly the reason I just said. It looked, and put together. The production values were top notch. I mean, there wasn't any, I didn't have any problem with the special effects. I like watching Benedict Cumberbatch, but calling him Khan Noonien Singh is a bit much. He's about the whitest white guy there ever is. I mean, Ricardo Montalban owned that role. So you got to bring somebody on with presence like he has. And
it's an iconic
as good as
thing.
Cumberbatch is, and he's a really, really good actor, he does not have Ricardo Montalban's charisma and presence. So
it's just such a different thing. I can't imagine them ever replacing him and it working. But I mean, I thought that about.
I mean, it's just, and they didn't even need to go there, And if they did, then they could have. Like I said, it looked exactly like it was a series of scenes that had to happen with a bunch of weird glue putting them together. Getting back to Star Wars,
yes.
What were we on there? We were talking about the
what a mess episode 8 was.
Oh God, yeah, the mess of 8. So. Okay, so because you got this social stuff. You've got Luke tossing his saber and disconnecting from the Force and basically being completely not the Luke Skywalker that we actually knew he had graduated up to. And there's no real understanding of why he's such a disaffected, droll, doesn't give a shit about anybody kind of person. And they really didn't give you the backstory to explain it at all. Him going off on Kylo at some point does not even begin to explain a psychological breakdown of the magnitude that Luke was having. So I was not at all satisfied with how that story was told.
I would have done it differently. I do like the part, especially now that we talk about it, and I've been reading some things, and the whole thing where he's saying, hey, look, we were way too full of ourselves as Jedi Masters, thinking that we got all the moral high ground. That kind of thing I thought was probably important to the overall story.
I agree. That line, definitely correct. Because I actually didn't finish my thought of where I thought the balance thing was going. But
go ahead. I'm sorry, I did interrupt you.
We'll get to that. Tell me what you're thinking.
We wanted to see as fans, and I think I can speak for everybody. We went to see Luke Skywalker fully realized as a badass Jedi. We never got it. We didn't even get it returned. He wasn't quite there. Come back, and now he's hiding. He's in hiding. We got to find him. He won't help his friends. It doesn't. Maybe it had to happen the way it's happening. We'll find out with Rey and all that. But and we weren't going to get it because although they got them all back in shape and didn't use any of them that way, but they all got them all back in shape for the trilogy. And Luke could probably, Mark Hamill could probably do a few moves here and there, and he can do some CGI, but they didn't give us what we wanted on that. And I think that was disappointing to everybody. We all wanted that. We're not going to get it. And maybe it makes sense to us not getting it at this stage in the game because it took so many years to get there.
Well, maybe so. Abrams clearly had some ideas of where he thought all of this was going to go. He laid some groundwork that was obviously groundwork. And, it would then be developed over the course of the second and the third movies. Rey's abandonment on, you know, the planet she was stuck on, Tatooine, I guess. The fact that the lightsaber was giving flashbacks, that was weird. But I was like, okay, I guess. Yeah. I'll go with it, I guess, right? But what were the flashbacks? They didn't make any goddamn sense, right? I mean, give me something to hold on to here besides nothing but mystery. So that was a little bit, but at least it was groundwork. There was something being laid there. And then you had bitch-ass Kylo Ren, who was acting just as much a bitch as Luke Skywalker used to act, right? So you're like, all right, it runs in the family, and fine. And he's gonna, you know, okay, this is Han Solo and Leia's kid, and he's all tormented and off on the dark side, and okay, that's cool. And then he kills Han, and you're like, fuck this motherfucker, I want him dead now, right? Because there's coming back from killing Han Solo. Fuck you, Kylo Ren, you must die. Period, right? There is no coming back from that.
Right.
So once that happened, I went, okay, that groundwork was laid. This is the villain. And I was like, okay, I was okay with that, which is why the mess of 8 fucked it all up, because he basically ignored all that groundwork and went, I get to start from scratch. And he's throwing stuff in that made no fucking sense at all, you know? And I'm obviously profanely upset about it. So
I will say, if you take episode 8 and just watch it for pure enjoyment of watching a film without thinking about the whole package, you can enjoy. I enjoyed the second time I watched it on Netflix, but again, when you think about it, nothing makes sense.
Exactly.
But we're getting somewhere with what they did with the second movie. By second, I mean this trilogy, episode 8. I think the whole reason, I think they probably, no one's going to talk about this publicly, but I think they probably gave restraints to Rian Johnson setting up episode 9. He probably could do very little with it, so he just did what he could. And the whole point of the movie was to show, I'm making a point. You can make, you can respond in a second. Sorry. That's all right. You're getting really mad over there. I'm really firing you up. Trigger. The whole thing was the thing where Rey and Kylo are starting to connect in some way, and Rey might go bad and Kylo might go good, and then they fight together, and then they separate, and then they try to kill each other. I think it all means something, and we're going to get to that by the end of the conversation. But go ahead and respond.
Well, I was shaking my head because you said I thought he was restrained by what he could do for episode 9. I know for a fact that's not the case. He has literally said, and J.J. Abrams have said in interviews, that Rian Johnson was given free reign to take it wherever he wanted to go. And
why would you do that in a trilogy, a complete story? I don't get that.
Well, here's the thing.
Directors, different writers.
Here's what's hard to believe. And yet, I have read these guys talking about this, and it was very, very clear that when episode 1 was done, J.J. Abrams was done. And whatever notes or whatever he left behind, and I don't know that he did, I don't know what he put there as far as framework of where he thought all of this was going. Well, Rian Johnson just ignored whatever was there and did his own thing, which was very, very clear by the mess of the movie and all the dropped strings, the dropped plot threads. You know, I mean, Phasma. You know, there was a character that went literally nowhere.
Why bother? Right.
You know, if I was the actress who was playing, I would be furious with how that character was treated in the trilogy. It was set up to be this big bad guy, or at least a lieutenant bad guy. And then in the second one, it gets like, 30 seconds of screen time or something? I mean, it was pathetic. So it's just drop ball after drop ball after drop ball. So you expect in the second one, like you've said, and as was brilliantly done in Empire, you take every single one of these threads, you pull out all the important ones, but you got an idea of what all of them are, and you bring them all forward, and you either resolve them or incorporate them into a further plot line. You don't just leave them all hanging like spaghetti, flapping in the wind, and that's exactly what Rian Johnson did. And the disappointing thing to me, and the reason why I think Disney as a unit doesn't have their collective nonsense together on this one, is J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson didn't even seem to talk to each other between these movies. It was just sort of like, oh, J.J. did this. Well, we're bringing Rian in, and he's going to get complete creative control to do whatever he wants. And clearly he did, and he just didn't pick up any of those balls. And then he created a whole set of new stuff that was like, what? Like just throwing stuff out there that just didn't really make any sense at all, So that was my problem, my structural problem with 8.
Well, they got to give you something, and they gave us nothing. If you're going to use Empire Strikes Back, middle film as a guideline, we got that Luke's father was Darth Vader.
Yep.
Leia's got some kind of Force connection with Luke that we couldn't quite figure out at the time. What's going to happen to Han Solo? We had all these great questions. This movie was like a standalone.
The romance.
Han and Leia. Yep.
Luke actually gets trained. Yoda is introduced. There's more revealed about how the Force works. There's the conflict with Luke and his own struggle with his dark side. I mean, there's even with the head in the helmet, you don't realize, oh, that's his father, but you didn't even know that, and you could see what was happening. So that was all brilliant storytelling.
Yeah, nothing. Come and think of it, nothing happened in Episode 8.
Right. Except that
nothing
the rebellion got
all.
wiped out, basically. The rebellion just got turned into dust, right? And now we're supposed to pick up in the next one, like, what is it, 5 years later or something? So
is it going to be 5 years later?
Yeah, I think it's like 5 or 6 years later or something. I don't know, and clearly per the trailers, we're going to have, Rey and Kylo facing off. And I'm kind of curious about that. Here's the only way I think that this could wrap up in a way that at least I would approve of as a sensible, bring everything going all the way from the beginning forward, bring it all together in terms of what this balance of the Force issue is. Let me just bring this up, and I'm really curious what you'll think about this. We see the corruption of the white or the light side and the dark side always trying to, get revenge or whatever. Oh yeah. What the hell are the Sith trying to get revenge for? That's never made clear ever, So anyway, drop that. That's just a rhetorical question. But
losing an Endor.
So we come to the end, and we've had too much light. We've had too much dark with the Empire and Vader and all that. So wouldn't it be an interesting resolution if the two, basically, if the two sides combined?
Well,
and that actually the ideal, use of or methodology, the ideal way of embracing and utilizing the Force is to recognize that all of us have a light and a dark, and that it's the unification of those concepts and the use of both sides in harmony or in unity that actually is balance to the Force, not this yin yang endless battle, but a coming together. I don't know. I have no idea how that would be expressed in a storyline, but I think if it went there, then the final Lucas vision would be realized.
So I was doing some research before leading up to this podcast and about if George Lucas had a plan for the future, how he's going to do the sequel trilogy. And he was going to do something with the Book of Wills, which I think you probably heard of.
Yeah, from the original novel, from the original story of Star Wars from Lucas.
Right. So with the Wills were supposedly some kind of creature that, different plane creature that controlled the Force, the good, the evil, the dark, the light. And they basically drove Jedis as vehicles, basically, for their goals or whatever the case may be. So I don't know. Something like that.
They were some kind of, wait a minute, like angels or something, like some kind of supernatural creatures that utilize the Force?
I believe so. That's how I understand it. There was going to be, originally what George Lucas wanted to do, my understanding is something he talked about in a book written by James Cameron, he was interviewed. And it was something to the effect of the original trilogy, Star Wars, was going to start being told from the standpoint of the Wills. And they would talk about these creatures they were observing, the Jedi and the Sith, I believe. So, and anybody who's like a super Star Wars nerd is going to watch this and be completely annoyed with me talking about this the way I am. But, something like that. My understanding is something around those lines. But there's a
I've never heard about any of this except to have, that Book of Wills thing in the original novelization. I never saw any other development of that idea. So this is all new material to me.
So in the journal, it says this, and a lot of people have read into it over the years. People have been talking about this since the new trilogy started, but it hasn't been like a mainstream thing because no one's touched it. But the creed goes, first comes the day, then comes the night. After the darkness shines through the light. The difference, they say, is only made right by the resolving of gray through refined Jedi sight. So the gray, I imagine, would be the balance between the good, the light, and the darkness, and the Jedi being able to see.
Wow, that kind of goes in the same direction I was just talking about.
That's why I said it. That's exactly why I said it, because you're exactly where my theory was on what they may be going. If they can tie that together, and let me ask you, if they can tie that all together in episode 9 and make it make sense for the entire body of the saga, will that save the saga for you from being completely destroyed?
Yes, that would save it for me from being completely destroyed. I will rain on Rian Johnson's bullshit 8 parade forever because of the reasons I've laid out here. It shocked me. It really, really shocked me that the man who made Looper is the same guy who made Last Jedi, because Looper was an amazing film, and it was so well written, and it was so tight, and it was so well put together, and it was such a great experience in the movie theater, And this was the exact opposite of all of that. And I just, it really, really surprised me that somebody who I know is capable of amazing filmmaking could turn out such a turkey.
Looper, the one about the guy that comes back, Bruce Willis coming back to his younger self?
Yep.
Okay, I have to watch that movie still.
It was Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis.
Yeah, I heard it was good. I haven't watched it yet.
It's very good.
But
for a time travel movie, sci-fi, it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to pull off too.
Yeah, very much so. And he did it exactly right. It was actually brilliant. The way it was put together was just, wow, this was great.
Can you imagine, yours is going to be no, but can you imagine if episode 9 is completed and you watch it and everything in 8 makes total sense and you're glad it happened? Can you imagine that?
If you can't, right? Pulls that off, I will bow to his greater glory. Right now, Abrams is not impressing me. So if he pulls that off with this, I will be pleasantly surprised, and I will sing his accolades in the halls of the Wills.
8 makes 8 can be a bad movie. They can have a bad movie in a trilogy. That happens all the time.
Yeah, not in Star Wars. Awesome. They can't.
So you didn't like Force Awakens? You thought it was too much of a rehash of New Hope?
I was okay with it. I was a little surprised at what he did with Luke and Leia, but I went with it. I was disappointed in what he was doing with Kylo Ren, but I went with it. I was intrigued by Rey and happy and interested in the fact. I mean, I'm not, big out and about there feminist. I want equal rights. That's what I want. I don't want to make a big production out of it. But I was really, really happy to see a female lead in a Star Wars movie, in trilogy, right?
That's why I'm not buying the preview at all. It's way too obvious to put that out front, but yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that's clearly a vision she's having or something. We'll see where all this goes, but the trailer did not impress me for 9, by the way. I was not happy with that trailer. So
what can they give you?
I hope they got more to show me in this movie.
They can't give us the how many times have you watched a movie preview and thought, oh, I've seen the movie?
I went to the theater.
all the time.
That happens all the time.
So I'm kind of glad they're not giving us a lot.
Yeah, I'm happy that they're not giving us the whole movie in the trailer. I'm just not happy with what they're teasing me with either, you know. And but I'm grumpy chicken because 8 is, you know, I am a very disaffected Star Wars fan right now. And I'm wearing my Resistance shirt right now. I mean, I am all in with Star Wars. It is literally on my body.
Is that a legit tattoo?
Yeah, that's a legit
Oh,
tattoo
you are
of
a Star Wars geek.
the
Yep.
Resistance symbol. I am all in with Star Wars. I always have been. So you're not talking to some like rando, you know, guy who just is hating on Star Wars. I love Star Wars, and I love the potential it has. And I hate it when people ruin that potential.
The Force Awakens made sense, at least. It actually had served purposes. You got to see one of the originals like drive the whole thing. It was really very much Han Solo driven.
Very much so, but utilized in a clever and productive way to drive the story forward as well.
Right.
You know, it was a decently told story. You know, he laid it out. There was a beginning, a middle, an end. We saw where things were going. There was lots of
questions to answer. Yeah, there's intrigue. Yep.
You know, lots of setup there, lots of fertile ground to do stuff with. And anyway, I'm just sound like a broken record when I talk about how 8 ruined all that, but I was okay with 7. You know, I wasn't like, oh my God, I can't wait, this is amazing. I wasn't that. I was, okay, all right, this is cool. I enjoyed some of what I watched. You know, there were some major problems I had with 7. One of them being the fact that everybody thought after 20 years that it was all a legend. Excuse me? I don't doubt the existence of Woodstock, or that the People's Temple happened in the 70s, or that, you know, these various historical things that happened within living memory are somehow legendary, and Luke Skywalker I thought he never existed. You know, I thought he was a fairy tale. Too short a time frame for that, man. You got to put a couple hundred years in place for something like that. So that didn't fit. That was not, I didn't buy that at all.
Do you think every planet knows what happens on every other planet?
I think in that universe, with that level of communication that goes on between those planets, 20 years is not long enough for our Jedi Knight and the entire concept of them to fall into legendary status. That's why I was making comparatives to Woodstock or something like, you know, or the Holocaust. I mean, these things don't just fade from memory after 20 years. So I just had a problem with that, you know. And what was the other thing? Oh, the First Order. Where the hell did that come from? Who's Snoke, right? Like what? Oh, talk about a wasted plot thread. Snoke.
I'm hoping they bring that together. That's one of the things. So he's standing there on the bridge with Han Solo with his dad. And he has this moment he needs to have to go dark and kills his dad. And then he's still got angst in the next movie. And then he's got to kill Snoke because Snoke's going to push him over the edge and get him to the right spot. And that doesn't do it. So
I know.
I don't know.
Right?
I don't. It does feel like I get the dread. I get the dread and the hate and the not being confident in the next film because it seems like it's going to take 6 hours to tie all the loose ends together and make it make sense. But I'm hopeful.
Exactly.
Hopeful.
Yeah, exactly. And they feel confident in saying for sure is that this completely, fully, and excellently resolves the Skywalker saga. So I'm like,
I thought that was when Darth Vader threw the Emperor over the rail. I thought that solved it. I thought that was it. That wasn't it?
No, man, that wasn't it.
That was Anakin fulfilling the scriptures, right? The whole prophecy, saving the galaxy. Or maybe it was Luke when he trained Rey. No, maybe it'll be Rey or Kylo when they team up against the Emperor this time. I don't know.
I don't know, man. I just don't know where did the First Order even come from, and how did because we ended the Return of the Jedi with the Empire was gone. I mean, that was it. It had been defeated. The Emperor was dead. Vader was dead. The entire structure was dead. So according to the history of Star Wars, according to the movies, there was no Senate. There's no Imperial Senate anymore. So it's just a bunch of Imperial regional governors who are running the galaxy, right? So from Coruscant with a dead Emperor and a dead Vader, you take that infrastructure and you just take hold of it. But so did somebody do that? Clearly somebody did, and I guess that was Snoke. So who's he, and what's that story? I'm fascinated. I want to know all about it. There's not a hint in the first or second movies of that.
I think there are aspects to this overall saga that's going to have to be answered in a Star Wars story or a series of Star Wars stories like Rogue One, Explain the Death Star, which I'm glad they did. And it was a little bit late for that, but it was cool the way they did it. And it was, so look, I make the argument, I'm about to contradict myself. I make the argument that we can't have such high expectations for 8. And what we want for all these movies aren't going to be what we wanted, what we were looking for yet. I don't know 99% of the people in Rogue One, and I love that movie, and I was completely invested. So, just a good movie.
Yeah, well, good movie, good storytelling, good production values, go a long way. And if they just go back to some basics, answer some questions, bring things together, and resolve it to a happy ending, that's pretty much all I can ask of them with 9. And I hope that they can do that. And I hope that they don't, and I guess that to me means, hey guys, don't screw it up too badly. Please fix some of what you've done and bring this to a resolution that fits with the whole big picture of what this story is. Maybe that's too much to ask, but I hope that that's what I can get out of episode 9. And I guess we will see where it goes.
It's so funny. I came on kind of trying to take the position of like, we're being too hard on the Star Wars saga, guys. But I've really put it down pretty bad, I think. I got a question. Is Kathleen Kennedy a Scientologist?
Not that I know of.
I think she is.
Really?
That would explain everything. I could be wrong. I don't want to misidentify somebody. If I start harassing, don't harass people. But don't do that.
The story does begin with the Lucas equivalent of Once Upon a Time, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, right? And Scientologists, I've commented before, have always loved that was the beginning of Star Wars, because Star Wars is not a science fiction future tale. It's something that happened already way long ago and way far away from here. And we're watching this have all played out, out in some other zone of the galaxy. And Scientologists love that because that is how they imagine their past lives have been. And they love Star Wars for reasons like that. They just eat that stuff up. But I never heard of Kathleen Kennedy. As far as I remember, I've never heard of her being connected with...
I really could be wrong, but I swore I read something about that. Maybe it was just someone asking the question. I'm not sure.
It could be. Sometimes people's names get associated with Scientology in satirical ways as well. Today, that came across my plate with Rush Limbaugh.
Maybe I was reading an article by what's his name? I'm embarrassed I can't remember his name. You know who I'm thinking of. Come on, man. Damn.
Jeffrey Augustine?
Jeffrey Augustine, thank you. I was just drawing a blank. Yes, Jeffrey Augustine does articles like that all the time.
That's right. He's the one that did the Rush Limbaugh article.
Was he?
And then somebody comes on my channel and writes a comment, is Rush Limbaugh a Scientologist? And I'm like, definitely not. And he goes, but I saw this article, Google it, and somebody was asking the question, and I Googled it, and it's Jeffrey Augustine, doing a satire. And I'm like, do you mean this one? So anyway, we'll see what the guy says. But
my apologies to Jeffrey Augustine. I know who you are. I just blanked on your name.
Well, I take this stuff as seriously as the person I'm conversing with. In my day-to-day life, Star Wars is not really a thing. But, I do enjoy talking about it because I am passionate about my interests and my hobbies. And Star Wars has been a lifelong thing for me, So I really am kind of, there's been a lot of emotional investiture in that storyline. And I've got strong opinions about it.
Yeah, I hope we did a good enough job representing our views on this, because both of us don't really necessarily go out and talk about Star Wars on on our podcast and publicly. So I am interested to see what the viewers think about what we talked about today.
Me too. So clearly you'd have to be pretty geeky to stick it out all the way through everything we've talked about here today. But if you're still around with us, please leave any questions, comments, or feedback in the comment section below here on my channel at YouTube or at sensiblyspeaking.com. Chris, thanks for being part of the show this week.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Awesome, man. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.